Thank you all so much for coming. We're absolutely honored to be asked to present here at Destinations for All. We've seen some amazing ideas so far, and we're very excited to share ours with you. So, a disclaimer, we know that we're not the first people to try this particular project, but we hope we're doing something a little bit different, and with your help and support and input, we could actually make it into something that can achieve some change. So what is UMOJA? The story started with this lady. She's my aunt. Her name is Usha. Usha had polio as a child, and she's a wheelchair user. But that has never come in the way of her travels. She travels north, south, east, west, all over the world. And she was telling me how difficult it was for her to find relevant and useful, reliable information about where she could stay. All the horror stories about how she would call up a hotel, get all the details, and at the end of the day, despite spending hours of research, land up at the hotel and find it to be completely inaccessible, really resonated with me. So I went back to school and I spoke to Ben, who has who's my partner in crime here, has an accessibility background, and he made me understand how widespread this problem was and how truly poignant it can be for someone's travel experience. We also understood how significant the market potential behind this was and how many people needed better information to travel. So we said, okay, why don't we decompose the issue? These are all points you've seen before in various forms. But we said, okay, the three key challenges we find are, one, poor quality of information. It's usually not detailed enough, it's not reliable enough, and it's not gathered in a way that is scalable. So it's not available enough. The second is that one size doesn't fit all. Well, we found that this term accessibility actually covers a very broad spectrum of guests' needs. So when you look at impairment-based classifications alone, so whether somebody is a wheelchair user or visually impaired, it doesn't actually get down to the individual's needs or preferences. So it's difficult to search based on those. Lastly, most of the reviews we get from users are pretty generic. How do we get specific targeted reviews from people that are useful? Lastly, we found that in terms of searching and comparing across hotels, the functionality that you get on mainstream websites, where you can easily say X hotel has such and such features and costs so much, and Y hotels has ABC features and costs that much, is not really easily available for accessibility information. So we decided, why can't we actually see if we can leverage some technology to address these issues?
And here's what we did. So we designed a self-assessment app, which we believe is both efficient and scalable to enable accessible assessments to take place. So it's developed and tested, and it's also free on the Apple Store. We'll give you the link later on. And it gathers over 250 data points in less than 90 minutes. That's where the efficiency lies in it. The idea of developing a self-assessment app is that it would be able to be undertaken by people, engineers, for example, who don't necessarily have a background in accessibility. So in order for more people to be able to use it and for more hotel assessments to take place, some of the research that we did was to basically get complete novices in the field of accessibility to go through our questions and to basically highlight some areas in which additional information is needed. And we in turn added some help text. In addition to this, the app also asks people to take photographs as they're conducting the assessments. So the idea of this is that it'll be a sort of objective portrayal of the area in question, and it'll give the potential guest the ability to make a subjective choice depending on their needs of that area. So all of this was developed using international standards and guidelines. This includes the American ideals from the Americans with Disabilities Act, as well as the building regulations of the UK. That's Part M on accessibility. And yeah, here's what it looks like. Are we up? Yeah, we're up. So what you can see in front of you is basically a map of the hotel. We know that a guest won't just stay in a room. They want to access all parts of a hotel. So we don't just focus on the room in question. We look at, for example, the car park, entrance, lobby, etc., etc. But we also recognize, as has been resonated so often already during this conference, how integral an accessible bathroom is to a person's experience within a hotel. Okay. So this is what the bathroom area looks like. For the sake of time, I'll briefly sort of give you an overview of it. We start by asking someone to, basically take an overview, look at the overview of the parameter. This includes a broad view picture of the bathroom, for example. Then we look at specific nitty-gritty details. This includes whether or not the water basin has enough clear knee space. Sorry, am I making myself clear? Can people hear me? Thank you. And then finally, getting the person to also take a photo. So the idea of the photo is it provides sort of the visual information for a guest to make a potential choice of whether or not that area is suitable for them. So for the sake of time, if anyone's interested in hearing more about the app, then perhaps we can discuss it afterwards. So we also decided to test our app, and our solution was to go to India and take our fancy technology for a spin. So we piloted some self-assessments with a wonderful hotel brand in India called Lemon Tree. Accessibility is very much at the center of their CSR, so we'll provide the link to their website at the end of this session, and we highly recommend that you check them out. They're a really, really great brand. So with Lemon Tree, we conducted 6 assessments ourselves of their properties. However, they really bought into what we were doing and requested that we made an offline version of the assessment tool available for them, so that they could in turn go out to more of their hotels and conduct more assessments. So they in turn conducted 26 additional assessments, and our takeaway from that was, first of all, that hotels are willing and able to self-assess. It doesn't have to take an expert to do that. Secondly, that the information is accurate and efficient, and we got that from reading the offline assessments that they had done. But also that we have to be adaptable to the environment and recognize that not everybody can use an iPad. So hence we made the offline assessment tool available.
Just a small clarification on this offline bit. So it's exactly a direct replica of the questions in the app, and we still get photographs. Those questions are then put into an online form, so it's centralized, put into an online form, which we've developed for them, and then they send us the pictures in an itemized way. So we are able to achieve exactly the same thing with the app.
However, we recognize that a self-assessment app will not be sort of error-free. So we're very much looking at the self-assessment app as being the foundations in which we can build other means of verification. So the pitfalls associated with self-assessment include human error. So in addition to self-assessments, we're looking at guest feedback. We're looking for the guest to write reviews of their experiences, to state whether or not they were in line with their expectations from beforehand. And in addition to this, we're looking to engage with local accessibility experts, persons from, for example, local disabled persons organizations and other access groups to conduct expert audits of the hotels.
Which would be commissioned.
Yeah.
Just a note on the guest feedback bit. There have been models out there that try purely user-generated content here, and we find that actually that's asking a lot of somebody on a holiday. It's difficult for somebody to answer 250 questions, but if we provide them a foundation of information, they can then, it's much easier to say, actually, this was right or this was wrong. So we're hoping we actually elicit a lot more feedback that way. So we've understood all this great information about hotels and how accessible or inaccessible they are. We then need to understand more about the guest. So what we decided to do is, let's ask people to create guest profiles, access profiles we call them. And we initially approached this from an impairment-first perspective, to say, okay, well, what would a wheelchair user's preferences or requirements be? What would a visually impaired person's preferences or requirements be? And we very quickly started to understand that one size does not fit all. No two wheelchair users or visually impaired people have the same preferences or requirements about how they interact with the space. So we decided to turn this equation on its head and say, why don't we take an environment-first perspective? And why don't we ask questions like, how would you like to be alerted in case of an emergency? Or how do you navigate steps? How many steps can you climb? With or without a caregiver, on your own, independently, and how do you communicate a lunch order? So in this way, we actually get a much more detailed and holistic understanding about how a guest would like to interact with their space. We take both of those groups of information and run it through our fancy-dancy matching engine. What does that actually do? We take over 250 data points from the hotel, a user's preferences and requirements, and put it through an algorithm that allows us to understand not only whether a hotel is accessible at all, but how accessible it is. Are there more features of that hotel that the guest would like to use? If so, that hotel gets a higher ranking in the search results. If somebody needs a lift to get in and out of a pool, we know that that hotel has one, it'll show up higher in the rankings. In that way, we're actually able to deliver hotels that are more accessible to you, reviews that are more relevant to you, and travel information that's more useful to you. So if we review those challenges and we see what kind of solutions we come up with, we think we're tackling each of these in our own little way. In terms of poor quality information, we think we've come up with a reliable means through hotel self-assessment and then user verification. We think we can be quite detailed in the information, and we think we can achieve it in a scalable manner. So actually, hotels all over the world can do this. Second, we've tried to tackle the one-size-does-not-fit-all problem by having an environment-first approach. So to understand holistically how somebody would interact with the space they're in. And lastly, we've put it all into a search engine that we hope is not only on par with mainstream engines, but actually is better. It gets better results for people.
So, our case study, as mentioned, we piloted in India. We conducted over 50 assessments in collaboration with a local tour operator, Mercury Travel, which is India's oldest and longest standing tour operator. Conducted 50 plus hotel assessments all over the country. Yeah, the results were fairly mixed. Here's some of the top level findings. 13% of hotels had some accessible features for persons with visual and auditory impairments. It's quite a pretty low figure. But yeah, the contrast of that was that 70% of hotels had accessible features for wheelchair users. So in addition to that, we also collaborated with Swayam, which is a wonderful access group in India. I'm sure a lot of you have met Abba over the last few days. And after conducting the assessments, we also conducted a training in collaboration with Swayam of ground handlers. And this included guides from heritage sites. It included drivers, as well as training managers from hotels. And yeah, we trained them on basically disability awareness training so that they would better be equipped on how to provide the best guest experience for a person with disability whilst visiting. And this is all culminated in our very first customer, Mr. Martin Heng, who's back there.
Anyway, none of this would have been possible without a huge amount of support we've gotten from people in the field. As you see, we've named a bunch of them. Yeah, as you know, Martin, and I'm sure you've met Abba Negi. But we wanted to also give a special shout out to somebody on the ground that over the 2 weeks that he traveled across India with Ben, actually bought in to how important accessibility is for everybody. And Sunil here, who was a layman to accessibility before, as you can see, took measurements down to the millimeter to make sure that that information was correct. And we see the power of engaging people at a local level to do that. So how can you get involved? Very, very quickly. We'd love it if you could give us feedback. We're really looking for people to test this engine, to make sure that it works. So please go to the site, sign up, and we'll be in touch with you, or slip us your visiting card. Follow our story and cheer us on. Please be warned, we would never like to misrepresent ourselves. UMOJA is a for-profit business. We see a potential in this market. We want to make sure that we can deliver a great service to people who need it. And we think that there's a nasty term in the industry for us. It's mainstreamers. That's what we want to do. So please be involved. Give us your feedback. We'd love to have it. Thank you.
Thank you both. It's very exciting to see what you're doing here. And I know you know the challenges that is involved with this issue. So my interest and concern, I guess, is when you do this matching of the person's needs with the type of room gathered from the hotel data, that typically no two accessible rooms are the same in a hotel. Perfect example here at the Embassy Suites, my bed was much higher than my friend's bed, which was at an easy room rate to get into. So when you do this matching, are you matching a particular room? And then how do you guarantee that the person's going to get that particular room?
That's two very, very crucial elements. Thank you for bringing them up. So to the first one, yes, we actually do it at two levels. First is whether that hotel matches what your preferences or requirements are, and then we go down to the room level. So when you're looking at particular rooms, unfortunately the development cycle takes a little longer than expected, otherwise we could have shown you all of this. But when you go down to the hotel level, we actually score rooms themselves. So as long as that room meets your preferences or minimum requirements, that'll show up. If it doesn't, it won't. To the second question, this is the bane of the industry, from what I understand, is how do you ensure that that room is the one, when you book, how do you ensure that that room is the one you get? We've beaten hotels over the head with this one, and they've beaten us right back. Essentially, the guarantee word, they're not willing to give us. We've come up with an interesting way to get the highest probability that when you do get that room, when you do book that room, that's the one you get, by just continually barraging them with requests and reminders. Mr. Smith is coming on the 15th. He needs that room. Make sure you allocate it to him. The important thing is, if that room wasn't available in the first place, it wouldn't show up in the inventory. So at the time that you make that booking, that room was available. It's on us to make sure that we follow up and make sure that it comes through. But the G word is something that they weren't willing to give us.
Okay, thank you. And I just have one other question. I was just wondering, in your inventory or survey, do you indicate what isn't accessible? Because sometimes that's even more important than what is.
Absolutely. We have pros and cons. We have the access match and the mismatch, per se. So all of those data points are visible, and we highlight the ones specifically, as we know your profile, we highlight the ones that you would indicate that meet your preferences and those that don't.
Lady in the second row has the next question, and we'll have one more after that, and then I get stuck doing it next.
Hi, good morning. I would like to know, I have seen several sites who try to get the user reviews, and even one of the sites for restaurants and in and around New York, they just had to answer, I think, 6 or 8 questions, yes or no, just mark it off. Even they couldn't get enough people to review the places, and all that they asked was, when you go to eat there, just say yes or no, you can get in, you cannot get in. So are you thinking of, for example, you said it is commissionable for the organizations to go and do the assessment. Would you think of maybe giving coupons for dinner or an extra night for the reviewers, so it's an additional incentive for them to do this?
So we've debated this back and forth in terms of how we could actually incentivize people. I think there are two ways. The first is we're not asking for you to say, okay, here are all of the data points, or here are all the features in this room, was it great, was it not? We're saying, did anything not the way the hotel represented it to be? So we feel that if there's something that didn't work, and we provide a feedback channel about that, and we say we can actually provide that feedback to the hotel, that would elicit some sort of action. So we hope. The second, I hadn't thought about, if there are certain ways that we can incentivize people to become more willing to review on a sort of subjective basis rather than objective feature-based, we'd definitely be interested in that. Great idea.
All right, one more question at the back, and then lady in the second row from the back had her hand up. Yes.
Okay, so you were talking a little bit about different equipment that is also part of the whole assessment, and I'm wondering if are you going to be providing details about that equipment? For example, if it's a pool lift, if it can be independently operated, if it needs to be operated by somebody else, does it have remote control that the user can just, swim around with and, be independent that way, or do they have to, somehow get a hold of maintenance to, help them in and out of the pool? And same thing with shower chairs too. I mean, does the shower chair have a back? Are there handles? How
Right.
wide is it? Are you going to be including those details too?
So the great thing is actually the technology is flexible enough that we can push those new questions out as soon as we figured out that they're required. So yes, the point is we can.
Okay.
Yeah, just to add to that, this is very much a learning process for us as well. As Yeshwant said, the technology is very fluid. So after getting feedback from the guests themselves, from persons with disabilities, we're looking to incorporate more changes to our tools. So from the start, we've engaged. We've tried to engage with persons with disabilities as much as possible.
And sure, it's www.umoja.in. umoja.in.
It's Swahili, if anyone was wondering.
To that point, we've tried to make this presentation as accessible for everybody, but if anybody has any questions, please do come up to us at the end. We're here. We're happy to take you through it if anything wasn't clear.
Thank you very much.